everybody. I don't know if we heard that. How's it going? If you can hear me, just type in the chat that you can hear me. I always like to make sure my mic is working. Right, Erica can hear me, so there we go. Welcome to June's book club. We read the book in May. Today we have Faith Adiele, and her book Meeting Faith, which I have here in my lovely hand. And we're going to talk about her book, like we do every month. And you'll have a chance to ask her questions. And one of the benefits of a virtual book club is we get to draw in authors from all over the world. In fact, Faith was just talking about how she has a virtual book club. So you should drop that in the chat, Faith, so people can sign up for that. And she's based in SF. And so before COVID, she had to have the authors in person. And now we get the benefit of being able to listen to authors talk about their books from all over the world. And so, we've had folks from the UK, from the States, from Canada. So yeah, super cool. So thank you, Faith. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I got distracted by everything. All the good stuff Erica was dropping in the chat. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me.
So I met Faith through, I want to say Don George.
Entirely possible.
Who was also one of our book talk leaders a couple months back. We talked about his book, The Way of Wanderlust. I was introduced to Faith, and she led one of our writing workshops at our conference TravelCon, which is our yearly, was yearly before COVID, travel media event. And it was an amazing event, and everyone loved Faith's workshop, and that's how I became aware of her work, and who she was, and we just hit it off since then. And she recorded an amazing podcast for a writing course, which Erica can drop in. And so, yeah, and I wanted to have Faith here because I like her book, Meeting Faith, and especially because it involves my favorite country in the world, Thailand. Bupasata Dai Mai. So I love sharing everything about Thailand. So I want to have Faith on. So Faith, thanks so much. I have a ton of questions about your book, and I'm sure everybody else does too. But to begin, why don't you talk a little bit about your inspiration behind? We talked about questions or having a spiel, so she has a little bit of a spiel. So I always have a spiel about my book. It's like, you talk about it so much, it's sort of like this pre-recorded speech. So
I know, right?
I'd love to hear, Faith, talking about what was your inspiration for writing the book and what you hope you wanted people to get out of it. And then I have a bunch of other questions for you too about writing.
Sounds great. Okay, thanks so much, and thank you so much for inviting me. You and the network have been so supportive of diversity in travel and of me and my friends, and I just really appreciate that. Anything you ask me to do, I'm going to say yes to, because it's always going to be quality and thoughtful and fun. So that's great. Okay, so I never thought that I was going to write about this because initially. I don't know if I'm going to assume that everybody has not read it and has not finished it, but at the beginning, I kind of set out how I kind of just bumbled into this thing, and for me, often I originally thought of the story as a narrative of failure, that I had been this promising young intellect, and I had gone to a fancy school on scholarship, and that's what, if you're an immigrant kid, that's what you're supposed to do, and then I had been so weak that I had flunked out, and so and then ran away to lick my wounds in Thailand. And so for me, it was a narrative of failure, and why would I tell anyone what I did? And I fell into the temple in the process of talking to these women, and I was really fascinated by them, but I didn't want to have an experience myself. I just thought, I flunked out of college. I need to resurrect my intellect. And so by maybe studying these women, I could, you know, produce something that would be amazing. And obviously, in some part, they were touching my heart because when I would ask them, like, why are you living as a Buddhist nun when when Thai society reveres monks and really looks down on nuns, and they would say, I've never been more free in my life. So on some level, clearly I was looking for freedom, but I didn't have the language for it. And so I was just like, well, if I could figure out what they're doing and capture it anthropologically, then I will have earned my way back into my education. And of course, I didn't really pay attention to all the warning signs of, what kind of temple I was going into, that it was a vow of silence, and that it was based around meditation, none of which I had done. So it was like, I was completely idiotic, which was good because if I had known intellectually what I was doing, I would have never had the guts to do it. And so by blocking out all the warning signs, I happily tripped down this path into this wonderful opportunity. And when the head nun said, if I tell you what we're doing, you'll forget. But if you touch it and see it for yourself, you'll always remember. That I recognize that as a real opportunity. So it
So
really,
Faith,
yeah.
I just want to interject one funny anecdote. When I was in college, I
Uh-huh.
also got into Buddhism, and at UMass. So, and I got heavily into Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism specifically.
Uh-huh.
And I would drive to Boston every week for like the meditation. And
Oh,
that
wow.
line was sort of like what the monk, the Lama Surya Das, wrote a great book called Awakening the Buddha Within.
Mm,
Um, about like that was his thing. He said, he was a child of the 60s. He said, I did a lot of drugs and mushrooms would take you to the mountain, but they
mm.
wouldn't keep you there. But
Oh, wow.
Buddhism and meditation would keep you there. And that's why he stayed in it. And I also did a silent retreat, not knowing what I got into. And that was
Oh,
really
that's
tough as
hilarious.
a 19-year-old. So just wanted to interject that. So I
I
like
love that.
in reading this, I was like, oh, I remember these days.
Mushrooms will take you to the mountain. That's like the best line. I love that. That's so funny. Thank you. That's good. It's interesting because you never know like who you have connections with or, what similarities you would have. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I kind of just fell into it, saw it was an opportunity. It was super hard. And then I just kind of put it aside because it didn't fit in with my narrative. So I never thought I'd write about it. Like occasionally, like at a party, I'd get liquored up and I'd be like, I was a Buddhist nun, and just kind of still talk, but I didn't think I would write about it because I didn't really know what the story was. And I also felt that I already felt that my identity wasn't central, wasn't the identity you see in American literature, in coming of age memoirs, in who travelers are. So being someone who's black and mixed race and Nigerian and Nordic, I just thought like if I throw in Buddhist in there as well, like I'm not, I have no demographics. Who's going to like buy my shit? So I also just felt like I didn't know how to explain that to people. And so it was years later. I was what was I doing? Oh, someone had put out a call for journals, for an anthology of journals by Black women. And so someone sent me the call, and I was like, oh, I've kept journals 3 times in my life. So I sent some journals, and the editor wrote back and was like, these are great, but I can't use them. Do you have something else? And I'm like, okay. So I sent her my next set of journals, and she's like, these are great. Can you use them? And I'm like, oh God, well, the only other thing I have left are these journals I kept from when I was a Buddhist nun in Thailand. And she was like, why did you not lead with that? And I was like, oh, do you think anyone would be interested in that? She's like, what is wrong with you? Send me those journals stat. So I'm like typing them up and I like send them in and they get accepted. And then when the book comes out and it's the Norton Anthology of Black Women's Journals, Ms. Magazine wants to like do a feature and on it, and they decided to choose some excerpts from my piece, and then they're like, and we also want a photo of you when you ordained, and I was like, wow, this has been my bucket list to be in Ms. Magazine. So I sent the stuff, and then I started getting fan mail from people asking me, like testifying and saying what Buddhism had meant for them and what was it like for me as a black person and just all of this stuff. And I thought, oh, there's when you share something about yourself, it gives people something. And if I could only figure out what I got from this, there seems to be interest in it. And so then that sent me on the quest to figure out why I had done it, what I'd learned from it, and then how I was going to structure the book. And so then I typed up all the journal entries and looked at it and was really kind of amazed at this young character I met. I was like, oh, she's really fearless. And I kind of like her and I've kind of lost her. And so it would be kind of nice to spend some time with her crafting this book, figuring out what the story is and why I did it and what I learned from it. So that's how I eventually fell into writing the book.
So when you were going through the book and reading your journals, is most of this book your journals? Because one thing that I found really interesting in the book is like you have all these sort of side notes into it,
Yeah.
right? So is that your journal itself, or is the book itself the journal crafted into a sort of a more
Really
cohesive
got mind.
narrative?
It is so initially I thought I would just type up all the journals and then just like slap on a cover and I'd like have a book. And so that's what I did. Like my first week of graduate school, I just like handed it to an agent and she like read it, like my 400 pages of journals, and she's like, okay, of course you'd have to rewrite this. And I was like, you don't understand my brilliance. I hate you. And so I like ran around town and like drank a lot and said how tough it is to be a writer. No one understood me. I did this like great performance. And then at the end of the week, I was like, okay, she was right. And I was like, how do I turn journals into a book? Like, what is the deal? And so my last night of acting up, I was in a bar in Iowa City, and a pair of Doc Martens appeared over my head, and then the Doc Martens slid down, and it was followed by a woman like who was all tatted up, and she had blue hair, and she had like a dog collar around her neck. She had like climbed over the back of my booth, and she's like, "Hi, Faith," and I knew that she had been sent to me, and I was like, "Will you read my 400 pages of journals and tell me how to write my book?" And she was like, "Okay." So she was this amazing experimental Argentinian woman poet, and I like drove to her house the next day and gave her my journals. And a week later, she had me over for lunch, and she had marked in green ink all the themes that she saw. And she said, there are these themes that you're following that you can create a narrative. She says there's a lot of voices in here. There's the voice of the head nun, there's the voice of Buddhism, there's the voice where you're like wrestling with yourself internally, what's happening in meditation. There's kind of this critique of Thai society. There's all this stuff, and why not come up with a structure that will honor those voices instead of trying to simplify it? So then that's when I had the idea that the actual journals themselves, the journals, when you see journals, they promise something. It's a kind of a lean in, it's a whisper, it's unmediated. You feel like you're going to get some raw, it's going to really tell you how it is, but they won't have the distance that you have of a memoir where they can reflect back and they can't move around in time. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great if the middle part was a memoir that went back to my childhood and to the things that led to this moment and had some distance to make meaning, but that you also had the journal entries that show that when you try to change your life, it is this ragged journey where you take one step forward, two steps back, one step, and that you're doubting yourself. And I thought the journals could accompany the reader and show a different entry path in, which is more more granular than what will happen in the memoir in the middle. And so a lot of the notes that I took in my journals became the basis of the scenes that are written in the main part in the memoir. And then there were other things that I wanted to, and the journal entries are supposed to be related thematically. And so then I wanted to show kind of the things I was reading, the way that I had turned the the anthropology towards myself, and I start to study myself and my own practice, since I'm not able to do the anthropology on the other nuns that I thought I was going to. And so all of that stuff could happen in the journal entries so that you would have multiple access points in and you could read it however you want. And in some way, it is in fact a map that mirrors what happens when you arrive in a different land and you have to figure out, where do I go? Who do I listen to? What makes sense? And so you see this page and you have to, it gives the reader a lot of agency to decide how they're going to engage and make sense of it.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Last month we had Rolf on in his book,
Mm.
and Marco Polo Doesn't Go There. At the bottom of those stories, he sort of has sort of this all these notes to like add more context and depth
Mm,
into it. And
uh-huh.
so when I was rereading this book and reading your journals on the side, it sort of reminded me of that. And it's very unique to memoirs, because memoirs, they don't provide that depth of context that
Right.
this book does. In reading, like you write out the four tenets, and
Yeah.
um, here's one. I just go, I want to eat. I've gone 2 days without food, and around everything, and it's really it gave a lot more depth to who you were and your
Mm,
struggles going through um, this time period.
yeah. Well, I also didn't want it to, I mean, on some level it's about Buddhism, but on another level it's not about Buddhism at all, right? It's about, finding yourself and recovery and coming of age and, it's about all these other things too. So I didn't want you to have prior knowledge of Buddhism to be able to understand it. So I did want to spell the things out in real time as I was learning them too, because I didn't know anything. I mean, I'd been to some, you go to temples all the time when you're in Thailand, but I didn't really know. And I'd read some Buddhism, but I never meditated, and I didn't really have a relationship with it at all. So I thought I could provide what I knew too, and you could choose to read it or you could skip over it and just, read whatever it is you want to follow too.
When you wrote this book, sorry, I have allergies here, guys. Always have allergies. Today is really bad. I've changed climates. I went from West Coast to Austin, and then of course my system's like, why'd you do that to me? Uh, that's why I'm a little sniffly. But when I wrote my memoir in 2019, a lot of that stuff, when I was reading my journals, I mean, that was 2006, a lot of that stuff. And so
Yeah,
when you were writing your book and reflecting on this, in 2002, 2000, it says published 2004. So,
yeah,
um, and from how many, like 15, 20 years after the fact,
yeah.
um, and you said you're finding yourself. Did you, I guess I have two questions. One, how much had you forgotten? Like, were you like, wow, I like, my mind has sort of glazed over these difficult points over the years. And two, in meeting yourself again,
Hmm.
did it change who you were? Like, did you reflect like, well, I've lost some of this stuff. Let me be my old me in some ways.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. Definitely. I mean, I'd remembered big picture stuff, but I mean, if you're journaling on a regular basis, and again, I'm not someone who does journal on a regular basis. I tend to do so when I'm traveling because, all your synapses are open and you're just taking in everything and you want to put it somewhere. And so, normally you just kind of remember big picture stuff. So to go back and look at something, also, I think because I was living with a vow of silence. So anything I was thinking was going into the journal. So it was even richer than it would have been normally. I was in this unusual environment. It was very contemplative. I wasn't able to speak, and I was trying, and I'd gone in with this anthropological mindset. So much happened in the journals, and so yeah, it really I felt like I was time traveling to something that I had only remembered in the vaguest way, and the biggest surprise was the narrator, because of course, you know I had also kind of, blundered into things with the hubris of youth. And as you get older, you get more cautious. And you're like, well, I can't do that. And so it was really great to see kind of how brave this person was. And I thought of myself as brave in kind of a political and activist sense, but I hadn't thought of bravery being required in spirituality or just in changing your life, in developing any kind of practice, an artistic practice, recovery. I mean, there was a lot of recovery there. Obviously, I had a breakdown that led me to it to start with. And so that there was bravery involved in all of that. And I don't think I would have made those connections. Had I written it right then, it would have been a different story. And so doing it years later and then seeing the connections of all the other things, I could make different meaning out of it. So I'm actually glad that I waited, because I feel the story's richer because of the connections I'm able to make. But thank goodness that there was so much detail because then that took me back. And I'm also very sensory based when I write, so I tend to like have things that smell and taste and remind, rather than photographs, I take other things, and so having that stuff. So I would like go out and get some of the fruits or the objects I refer to, and then that would kind of transport me into kind of a trance, and I'd remember like, okay, this is where the waterfall was, and this is, the temperature, and then I would kind of remember other things, really write the scenes from trance.
Have you been back to Thailand since? One of the things I always wonder about memoirs is what happens to these people, right? What happened to um, the head monk, the woman? I can't remember her name.
Rung dun.
What?
Rung dun.
Yeah, or your friends from college that were there with you. The ones where you were all true travelers and not the tourists, like the
Right.
ones from that Midwestern college that were just rolling in. Um, you know, what
We thought
happened
we
to
were
all
so
those folks?
special.
Do you know? Because
Well,
this happened so long ago, it wasn't like Facebook wasn't around to just be like, well, what's up with them?
I know. Yeah. I mean, that's the interesting thing. I just discovered the temple has a website. And they kind of specialize in allowing women to do the forest tradition. And at that time, they were the only place in Thailand that allowed women to do the forest tradition. They were off the radar, and I was the first foreigner they had ever had. So it's so interesting to think that maybe that led to the possibility that now this is a place where people come to do that thing. I mean, that's kind of interesting, but we didn't stay in touch. I mean, as I traveled around, I sent letters to the head nun, and at times I got some, responses, but I'm not a very good correspondent. I didn't stay in touch with really anybody in Thailand. I did, however, when I was writing the book, I got back in touch with my cohort of people and asked them if I could use their photographs because they had been taken by my friends, and then also letting them know that I was going to be writing about them in the book. And everybody responded and was like, cool, go ahead. And Scott, who was my closest friend, he's the only person that I'm in touch with. He's in Minneapolis. And so when I was in grad school in Iowa, we got back in touch and I'd go and see him. The interesting thing is he continued to go to school in Thailand and work in Thailand. And so he doesn't have the same memories, like the things that were like super iconic to me.
Yeah,
Like, remember when we did this? Like, he's got tons of more memories that have displaced them because he's been in that landscape so much. It's kind of like also like how immigrants, like their idea of the homeland is like frozen in time. So I'll be talking about things and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But he's a great guy, he's fun, and so that's the only connection. I went back and I've been around Southeast Asia, but I'm afraid to go back to Thailand. I mean, I hear from people it's changed so much. It seems so touristy that I kind of want to keep that frozen experience in my head too. Um,
I feel the same way. I mean, I won't go back to Koh Lipe, which is an island near the Malaysian border, because
Mhm.
when I went there in 2006, it was still on the map. Um, but we only had electricity for like 3 hours, a day because it was only generators, and it was one resort, but it was pretty low key. Like there was a last boat. One of the guys on the
Mhm.
island got stuck on the last boat, and so he had to spend the rainy season on this island supported by the Chalet fishermen because there was no boat. There was he missed it. And he got stuck there in Thailand for close to a
Literally
year.
missed the boat.
Um, and
That's
now
amazing.
you can take a speedboat from Koh Phi Phi and be there in 2 hours, and the boats run year round, and it's just you can look at satellite images from 2006 to now, and it's just all been developed.
Yeah.
I don't want to go
Yeah.
back. It's just
Mm.
um, so you don't know what happened to the monk,
No,
the nun.
none.
I
No,
wonder if it's on the website.
I know. I didn't see any individuals on the website. So yeah, I mean, I was looking for that, but
I
didn't see
think
any names
curiosity
in it.
would get the better of me, and I would just like have to find her. But that's just me. Cool. Well, I want to open this up to questions from others. So all you got to do is say, I have a question, and Erica will unmute you. So watch out for background noise. And let's pick Faith's brain about the book, the writing process, and anything else you want to ask her. If no one has questions, I have more questions too, but I don't want to monopolize your time. So,
I have a question. Oh, Jean can go first. Jean, go ahead.
I wanted to know if you ever bought a car and got married.
If I what?
Bought a car and got married.
On my list? I did.
Oh,
the last chapter is called "Get Married by a Car" epilogue, and you really don't do that in epilogue. So,
No, it was like so much later. I didn't buy a car until, oh man, after graduate school. No, before grad, because I drove to graduate school. So I got my license in my 30s, and then I've been married like, you know, 7 years, like recently, really recently. So I can't tell you what I've been doing, but
so I wanted, besides that question, wanted to tell you a couple of things, and that is I'm kind of affiliated with a Zen monastery in California and go on silent retreats. So it was like, this made me really homesick. It's like, oh, I miss that. I need to get back to that. And I haven't been there in a while. So thank you for that, because I needed the kick in the seat of the pants to get there.
oh, it's beautiful. Thank you.
And I haven't ever been to Thailand, but I went to Cambodia
Mm.
right before everybody got sick, and just fell in love with the place. And I'm imagining it's a lot like the Thai culture. So
Right, right. Yeah, I really would love to go to Laos and Cambodia because that's what people say. It's like what Thailand used to be. It's, and there is something that's so rich about Southeast Asia, just the confluence of the different cultures at the crossroads is just so fascinating and so rich.
it was really lovely visiting that and visiting Buddhism and visiting a monastery. And I was like, wow, it was like a little vacation here in this book. And I actually finished it 15 minutes before this discussion.
Oh my gosh, that's perfect. That's so funny. That's great. Thank you. You're actually so after I did so I returned to college and I graduated. I wrote my thesis on Buddhist nuns on the interviews that I had at the end when I was leaving, when anyone who wanted to be interviewed by me could. And so I put together that study and that was my thesis. And then I won a fellowship and I was supposed to go to Nun Island in Sri Lanka and do a comparative study of if you have a really, a system that supports nuns, what would it be like? Um, and but the Civil War heated up, and so I'd given up my job, I'd given up my apartment, I was just hanging out in Boston, just like, is this a skirmish or is this a war? And in that time that I was waiting, my scholarship got transferred to Nigeria out of the blue, and I am Nigerian, and I'd never met my father and siblings, and so that seemed like another divine intervention. So I went, and like 2 hours after being off the plane, like someone had told my dad I was there, and my life changed dramatically from from that moment. So I never really got back, and like my nun project was derailed, and I was going to live a life attached to Southeast Asia, and it shifted to West Africa because of the Tamil tigers.
Wow.
So
Oh, how wonderful to meet your
yeah,
friend.
so yeah,
so
real change.
did like that spark or like a new close relationship with your dad and your family? Because you said your life changed because of that. So like, yeah, changed in a good way.
Well, I mean, it was tough initially. My dad and I we didn't get along initially, but I mean, I was there for a year, and I'm an only child from my mom, and I was raised with my white mom, and so here's an opportunity to meet my siblings and to try to figure out this Nigeria thing. So I was like, I got a year to make it work. So yeah, it changed. It just meant I had to learn all these things about how to be African. I had to just so yeah, it just a long project, and then I did a PBS documentary about that and stuff like that. And so even though the process of reconciliation with my dad took a long time, and I'm still, I'm writing all of this stuff. So yeah, everything just shifted. I thought I was like, I'm gonna go back and like live this, this Buddhism life, and then it's, oh, I guess the world has other things in mind for me, and so yeah,
Interesting.
everything really changed. But yeah.
Anyone else has any other questions?
I
Raise your
have
hand.
I have a question.
Okay.
So you wrote all these journals with no hopes of them turning into anything, and then they turned into something.
Right.
And this was like in 2004 that this got published. So from 2004, when you traveled, were you like keeping crazy journals just in case something might ever come of them? Or was it just like that was a one and done sort of thing?
That was a one and done because I was like trapped in the temple and there was like nothing else to do. Normally, when you're traveling, then you're like, oh, now it's beer o'clock, and now I'm like talking to this interesting person, and now, and where was I? I was in southern India with this couple, and they kept a collective journal, and they would trade off like each night, and I was like, oh, I need that, like I need to outsource, I need someone who can, I could take turns with, or because I start out at the beginning of the trip writing down everything, and then I don't, it's too much detail, so I can't complete, and so I was going back and looking at some of my journals, and it's hilarious. I have one that's like, man and a woman walking down the road. You will never forget this! Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. That's it. Like no other information. And I was like, it must have been dramatic, whatever it was. So
But you forgot it.
no idea what it was. So yeah, I did not learn anything from that. I have not like really hacked good ways to do it. I mean, sometimes I do like, audio messages now, or I try to, do really good detailed letters, cards to friends, and then ask them to keep copies of them and everything. But I still, I tell people that they should keep travel journals, but physician heal thyself. No.
I love that. I love that you send letters and then tell them to send you copies of your letters. That's incredible. I think that's what an email is, but whatever.
Right, yeah. Exactly.
Uh,
So, yeah, because there is something about, yeah, when I feel like I'm my best self when I travel. So I would like to be able to capture that in some way. Um, but yeah. Um, do I?
yeah, I mean, I totally get that because when you're traveling, you're accessing all these different parts of you. Do you feel like you were your best self in Thailand or on a different trip? Like your best self?
I just think in general, on the road, I'm my best self, you
Yeah.
know. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
I think we can all relate to that. Can we not? I feel like the best version of myself also.
and I mean, it does help when it's someplace like Thailand that's like the exterior makes it very, so you can be very calm and it's physically really beautiful. And so you're kind of in touch with your artistic self. And, so there's some places where, it's kind of hard to be your best self, but just in general, just having that travel mindset. And like my best friend from college would do these things where we would say it's a travel day. And so he would just call up and be like, today's a travel day, just in our ordinary lives. So it's like, oh, you have to get to work in a different way. You have to like talk to strangers. You have to like have a map out. You just have to do these things where normally you're like, things aren't on time, or you're just like, oh, I have to wander off and like see this interesting thing, that's here, so we would just engage with our normal landscape in a different way, because it's not about where you are, it's about the mindset you bring to it and what you do with that time, and whether or not you look at people or whether you're just like plugged into your devices. So that's a one way of kind of bringing your best self in on a regular basis too, Ben.
I love that idea. I'm gonna start doing that. I'm gonna adopt that. When was the last time you did a travel day?
Um, Good question. I mean, I actually am traveling where I am right now too. So there's that. I'm on retreat, and so just like driving up and down the Pacific Coast Highway and like trying not to crash because it's so beautiful. I'm like, so doing that. But yeah, I mean, when we would also just do that and like discover a new part of town. So like go to a local immigrant run little bodega in some side of town and just chat with people and stuff like that. So I think before things locked down, well, even during the lockdown, I've been trying to do that too. Like who's there's a lot of kind of interesting kind of activity that's happening now as people are trying to survive, and particularly in the Bay Area, of like local people cooking in interesting ways. And so kind of doing that travel through the different layers of, communities. in my home in Oakland where I live now.
Wonderful.
Go ahead, Susan.
So, Faith, have you studied other spiritual practices since you came back from Thailand? Have you like explored other faiths, other ways of spirituality?
Hmm. I was actually raised, kind of studying different practices. That was one of the things that my mom did in her homeschooling. Like we had to study all different religions, and the whole idea was that when I was an adult, I would choose one. So so I did a lot of that growing up, and then at college, I took I took different religious courses to get a better sense. I was still very kind of wary of Christianity, but I became very interested in actually early Christianity and like Thomas Merton and like the real like early kind of spiritual stuff and paganism, Islam, uh, Buddhism, um, Hinduism. So some of that, but pretty much from an intellectual standpoint, like as college courses. But the Buddhism was really that, I think that having that intimate experience and realizing, because I don't think I'd realized that there was a difference between religion and spirituality before I had a spiritual experience. And then once I was like, oh, this is something completely different, then I was kind of hooked that Buddhism worked best for me, for someone who had been raised Unitarian and who's a bit skeptical and who also kind of suffers a lot in her mind because she's like obsessive and stuff like that. I was like, Buddhism is really good for me. And other than studying kind of mystic early Christianity, I was pretty happy sticking with it. I think. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
yeah. Thanks.
That's great.
Any other questions for Faith? If you're not on video, you can also ask a question. Or we'll let Matt go ahead. Wait a second, Matt, you're on mute.
One of the things I wanted to ask is that, having written this book so long ago, when you reflect on it, how do you think your writing has changed since then?
That's a good question.
Do you ever read your own, like, have you read this book since you've written it? I refuse to read anything I write.
That was really hard. I don't think I've sat down and read it from, when I'm looking for things, if I have to do a reading or something, then I'll revisit some sections, that I, trying not to cringe and be like, okay, well, this part's not bad. And I always kind of like edit it down because it always seems a bit clunky. I write long and I'm always like, why can't I just like, be crystalline and like get, to something. But it's really hard for me to tell how I've changed. I'm always interested in structure, which is why it always takes me so long to write something. Like every story I feel wants a completely different structure. And so having written this doesn't help me write any of the other things that I'm writing. So now I'm always trying to do something that, kind of has a tricultural point of view. And so when I'm writing family stories, it's like, okay, I tell it in a Nigerian lens, I tell it in a Nordic lens, I tell it in American lens. I'm always, interested in kind of non-linearity, interested in kind of code switching, bringing in terms, that kind of represent those particular cultures. And so it's always super like complex. And, in the same way that this was visceral, that like, it kind of mirrors, it looks like a spiritual text, and that came from the designer. It's based on the Talmud. It also is kind of like a travel map. And so I think that I like things to do physically to kind of almost like book arts, like take the reader on a journey as well. And so I feel like everything I write is very similar, but different as well. And I hope that at least the language becomes better. But I always do feel like I'm chipping away at something. Like people say, you should just like write a first draft, kind of just like put up all the scaffolding and like slap on the drywall and then you can prettify it later. But I'm someone who has to like build a perfect little brick I'm like, I gotta make my brick, and it's like, and then I'll put one brick down, and then I'll just make another brick and put another one down. So it's just like, it's gonna take me forever to like get the thing. I can't, do big and fast and stuff like that. So I worry a lot around each individual sentence and the structure before I write it. I don't know if the writing would change. Hopefully, it would be better. But I'm always going to be concerned with the structure, letting the story speak, etc. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
just
Okay.
curious. That's all the questions I have, actually. I think if anyone else doesn't have any,
We had a comment from Jennifer who said she really, really enjoyed your book and your writing style. And as a formerly religious person turned skeptic, she really appreciated that you weren't trying to convert her during your book, which is awesome. Yeah.
Well, and that was part of it. I was like, this book is going to be a hard sell to start with. I mean, for one thing, back in 2004, Buddhism and meditation wasn't as kind of mainstreamed as it is now. So I'm like, okay, so you've got a narrator who's not mainstream, and then you've got a topic that's not mainstream. And I was just thinking about like all the possible objections the reader might have. Oh, religion, it's going to be all serious and boring. Oh, it's Buddhism, I don't understand it. Oh, she's a person of color, she probably has issues. Like, I was just trying to think of like all the ways that I could seduce the reader into coming on this journey with me and saying it's essentially just a coming of age story about, how do we deal with challenges and change our lives, but the context is very, very unusual. So I tried to think about the elements that would be really approachable. And so I thought that, one, the fact that I was really skeptical, I didn't go in. I mean, I thought Buddhism was great in an abstract sense, but I wasn't interested in like being a participant of it. I didn't go in for a spiritual experience, and I didn't know very much. And then I also thought that, one of the things I loved in the temple is people were so hilarious. The monks and nuns had great senses of humor. And so it wasn't just that like, we're doing important spiritual stuff here. They were like silly and, irreverent and really smart and stuff like that. So I said, I want there to be lots of humor. And it is funny when like clothes fall off and I can't keep my, I'm a really bad nun. And so I was just like, let me lean into the humor. Let me lean into I'm just an ordinary person. I'm not placing myself on any pedestal. I like suck at it and I tried. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. And this may not be the way that you change your life, but you can change your life. You find the thing that will help you do it. And so I really wanted to be approachable and think about what would be most useful for people. And not turn people off. And so that was part of it because I had been, so proselytized to growing up in this really religious town where I was told I was going to hell like every week, so I wasn't interested in that at all. So that was beautiful.
Awesome. Well, before we all go, Erica has a little couple of things, but let's first give Faith a round of applause. If we can't see your image, we'll just assume you're clapping. Next month we are, well, Erica will mention it, but it is Scotland Beyond the Bagpipes by a British author, Helen Ochtra, I think is how you pronounce her last name. I randomly picked it up in a bookstore and I really enjoyed it. And that's how it came out to be that we're gonna feature it. Because I love Scotland, so it was all about. She drove around Scotland because she's a British travel writer, and as you know, when you go on assignment, you don't get to stay long and go really deep. And so she had realized that she had been to Scotland dozens upon dozens of times, but only in like these small little, snippets. Like really, just she lands, she leaves, and like there's no depth. So she just gets in the car and just drives around for months at end to get more depth beyond like these, puff pieces she was sent over to write sometimes. Really interesting. Anyways, I came across it simply at a bookstore, which is why I still love traditional bookstores, because that's, you just find lots of random stuff there. Sometimes it's not good. Sometimes it is.
Also, on the topic of bookstores, I had one more question for you, Faith. For everyone here that loves to read, is there a favorite travel book that you have, or a favorite book about a different country that you may let us know about, so that maybe we could
Oh,
add it to our list?
I knew you were going to ask that, and I was like, that's the thing I always suck at. I like
Or
all the
maybe
titles I ever knew like fly out of my head.
maybe one of the books that you've done for your African book club.
Hmm. Well, and I even forgot that I was just telling you about this guy, and then and how like we made him cry and he made me cry, but can I remember the title of his book? No. Um,
Okay, we'll send it in the follow-up email. Don't worry about it. If you can think about it, if you remember it, just type it in the chat.
that is hilarious.
I'm gonna give a little bit of a closing spiel right now, so don't worry about it. All right, for everyone, Faith, that was amazing. Your enthusiasm is electric, and I just love watching you laugh and explain all your stories. It's just awesome. If you enjoyed, I'm playing it. If you enjoyed today and this is one of your first events, I just want to let you know where you can find the rest at thenomadicnetwork.com/events. We write all of our events there. We have a ton up all the way through July. Next week, we have Jeremy, who's going to come teach us about editing your photos in Lightroom, so that you could put them on Instagram and it could look all wonderful. And then on June 10th, we're having Luke come and tell you how to turn your adventures into best-selling novels. He's written a bunch about different places around the world, and so he's going to give us some insight into that. Then on June 15th, gain confidence through improv comedy. I know everybody's been sitting in their apartments for a while, or houses, wherever you live. So this will, we're about to start meeting in person again. And so this is meant for travelers specifically to help you, like when you're out on the road, in the hostel, at meetups, whatever, just get more comfortable again. And then we also have an Indigenous designer, Rebecca Jarvie, is going to come on June 22nd and tell us about her life on the reservation, and also how she's incorporating her culture into her design. So it's going to be very interesting. And I highlighted those, but we also have a bunch of regional meetups, so feel free to come to those. And then again, I dropped the link already, but we have a book club coming on July 7th at 12 p.m. So be sure to get your book now so you can start reading. And I'll definitely include that in the follow-up email, along with Faith's favorite book that she's going to share with us. And just to let you know, again, we would love to invite you into our Nomadic Matt Plus community, which really just makes you a hyper awesome community member and gives you access to all of these TNN replays plus more. You get lots of personal stories that Matt doesn't share on the blog, input in the content that we're creating for Nomadic Matt, lots of live Q&As, free signed books, guides, never before seen photos, all that sort of stuff. And it's really awesome. And we would love for you to be a part of our community. We love just gathering people together, and the community that we've created there is one of a kind. So also, thank you for being part of this community.
Yes.
It was so awesome to have you here. We loved having you, Faith. We loved having you, community members. We love having you, Matt. Thank you so much for taking the time and for reading the books and for everything. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Faith, do you have any closing words?
Erica, you gotta turn your screen off. You allow people to exit. I don't know.